Hello and welcome in. You are watching another episode of Examining the Evidence in the case of JonBenét Ramsey. In part 1 of this investigative series, we analyzed the 4 special presents that were located in the wine cellar and examined how they may have made their way to the middle of the crime scene. In part 2, we will bring the focus to the presents photographed upstairs, under, and around the tree, and we will look into some of the known and unknown gifts the Ramseys received for Christmas that year. Did Christmas or any of the gifts play a role in what would ultimately happen to JonBenét at the end of Christmas Day? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe if you appreciate the in-depth investigative research and analysis you have come to know from Cottonstar Crime Scene. As a kid, do you remember Christmas? The most anticipated day of the year. The ultimate day of unrivaled joy and happiness. Christmas was real magic.
Are you watching closely? Go closer.
Go to sleep on Christmas Eve, and abracadabra, just like that, when you awake, somehow, a magic mountain of boxes filled with presents and toys appear all around the Christmas tree. Christmas could also be a bit of a bummer for some kids who have one or more siblings, because no matter how many good gifts you may have scored that day, if one of your brothers or sisters got something that you wanted and you didn't, well, that can make for a very bad day. When you're a kid, sibling rivalry and jealousy can ruin your whole Christmas. For this episode, you may have to at times look through the prism of a child's eye to gain a proper understanding of the psychologies and family dynamics that may have been in play inside the Ramsey home on Christmas Day. We know JonBenét's big gift for Christmas that year was her first new bicycle without the training wheels. In this photo, she is striking a pose with the most magical smile, and if you look really close, you can almost hear her say, "Ta-da!" revealing her shiny brand new bike to the world for the first time. We will examine the circumstances and delve into the details of her new bike in a moment, but for now, let's look at some of the other known gifts that JonBenét received for Christmas that year. One of the other gifts was a My Twin doll Patsy had custom made to look like JonBenét. She wasn't overly enthused with the doll and quickly moved on to other gifts. Patsy would later say that when she first lifted the lid off the long white box, that the beautiful doll with golden hair looked like JonBenét laying in a coffin. In his book, John furthered the story. Patsy shrugged, then examined the doll in the box and gave a shudder. Leaning toward me, she whispered, "John, this doll lying in the box like this with her blonde hair spread out and eyes closed, my gosh, it looks like a child in a casket. It kind of gives me the creeps." I gave the box only a quick glance because I was preoccupied with watching Burke unwrap the dark green Pontiac GTO remote control car that I had chosen for him. So it seems the My Twin doll didn't make the splash Patsy hoped it would, which is understandable. For Christmas, kids that age usually want toys they can play, ride, or whatever makes noise and lights up. In that last paragraph, John mentioned a gift he had picked out for Burke, a dark green remote control Pontiac GTO, perhaps like the one seen here in this video. JonBenét also received a jewelry craft making kit with beads and whatnot to make her own jewelry. She played with the kit just outside of Burke's room on Christmas Day, while Burke played with his big gift for Christmas, a brand new video game system, the Nintendo 64, with friends. Speaking of jewelry, JonBenét was gifted the golden trifecta of jewelry that year. A gold necklace from her Aunt Pam, a gold ring from her grandmother Nedra, and a golden ID bracelet from Patsy, which she had inscribed with JonBenét on the front and what would become an ominous 12/25/96 on the back. Moving on to this Christmas morning photo, Burke looks to be happy with the gift he had just opened. This was a Tyco remote control 9.6 volt turbo riptide racing boat, which at the time was Tyco's fastest offshore racing boat. In these photos, you can see a slew of open boxes and toys scattered across the landscape of the Ramsey living room, the same room where Linda Arndt would later lay down JonBenét right beside the Christmas tree. If you look closer at this photo, there is another toy hidden in the somber whisper of the Frasier Fir. In between the piano and the heartbroken stockings still hanging from the fireplace lie two boxes just off the carpet in the Ramsey living room. Two different boxes, unlike the other gifts that were strewn about, seemed to be standing at attention dress right dress, as if they knew they were about to be photographed, not under the circumstances of a holly jolly Christmas, but rather for a dark, doomly lit crime scene photo. Even up close, it's difficult to make out any of the words or imagery on either box. However, after a while I thought maybe the image on the far left of the bottom mostly red and white box was perhaps an airplane, which would match John and Burke's proclivity for all things airplane. With that, and a little time spent down a rabbit hole, I was able to identify what was inside the box. The toy was a Cox Corsair engine power control line airplane, seen here in these photos. This isn't a remote controlled toy where you can just use a joystick to control it. This is a lot more complex. In order to fly this plane and keep it airborne, the operator must have fixed a spool of weighted fly line attached to a handle to the model plane with a highly efficient knot, such as a uniknot or double overhand noose. They must also develop their dexterity to hone the skills that are required to successfully work the handle and keep the airplane in the air. This toy is rather compelling, and it instantly reminded me of Burke's other model airplane, the one in his room, hanging from the ceiling with a white cord attached to it, which could have been used to pull and play with it when taken down. This certainly was shaping up to be a stellar Christmas for Burke. The Nintendo 64, planes, trains, and automobiles. Oh, and a boat to boot. But what about a bike? Did Burke get a bicycle for Christmas that year? Before we attempt to answer that question, let's ask this one first. Why are there so few photos of the Ramsey Christmas? I've shown most of them already, and here they are again. 5 photos from the Ramsey Christmas, and no home video. This is a red flag, and this is why. In the 6 short years of JonBenét's life, I would venture to say that she might be the most photographed 6-year-old of all time. And if not, she's in the conversation. Think of all the random photos of JonBenét you have seen over the years. There must be close to 1,000 different photos of her on the internet alone, which is incredible considering this was before the widespread use of the digital camera. And every photo you have ever seen of JonBenét was before she was famous. Think about that for a moment. The Ramsey family seemed to capture every family event or function on camera. In the search warrant, over 180 videotapes were collected, some of which were home videos. Officer Yamaguchi found a Betamax video camera, videotapes, and a Betamax player recorder in the study on the main floor. These were in addition to the ZX-10 camera found on the Hugs and Kisses glass table in the hallway, and the video camera seen here on the kitchen table by the flashlight with a videotape beside it. I think we have established that the Ramseys were a picture and video taking family. So where is the Christmas morning home video? Well, according to John Ramsey, and he has waffled back and forth on this over the years, his battery was run down or dead, and or he decided to forego picture taking and film that year because he felt life was too precious and went past too quickly to interrupt it by fussing with the camera. In his 2001 deposition while under oath, he said, "JonBenét wanted me to make movies, but my battery was dead." The only reason why we have seen the handful of 5 Christmas morning photos from that morning is from the roll of film Ramsey handed over to police on the morning of the 26th. The lack of photos and video from that Christmas day is a red flag. a change in normal patterns and behavior on the day of the crime, like when a suspect who has never been late for work once is 2 hours late on the day his wife or girlfriend disappeared. And here's a question. How many bikes did Santa bring to the Ramsey home in 1996? 2? 3? Possibly 4? Why is it, after 27 and a half years, there isn't a clear, definitive answer to this simple question? Why are the bikes, like I say, mired in muck? Why couldn't the Ramseys ever give the same answer over the years, and why does it keep changing?
I think she got a big dollhouse. We both got bikes.
I will attempt to streamline the ride through the Ramsey interviews, and hopefully we can find a simple, definitive answer on how many bikes and who got a bike for Christmas that year. Let's start by looking at the Christmas morning photos. In this one, JonBenét is posing by the tree and seems to be showing off her brand new bike. It's the green one with a yellow water bottle attached to it. This is an Aqua GT Little Timber bicycle specifically made for girls. The byline in the ad reads, "The boys will be eating dust as you beat them all to the top of the local hills." Now, when I first started to investigate this, I thought perhaps this bike was probably Burke's. There were sources and in a few early books written in the case that reported the color of JonBenét's new bike was silver. This info came from their neighbor Joe Barnhill, who had kept JonBenét's new bike at his house until Christmas Eve. And after the kids had gone to bed, John ran over to his neighbor's real quick to grab the bike so he could stash it under the tree. This info also shows up in Steve Thomas's book Inside the Ramsey Murder Investigation, where he also has her bike being silver in color. However, I think this photo that came out years later finally confirms that the aqua-looking bike was indeed the one JonBenét received for Christmas that year. The second bike we see in this photo is behind JonBenét on its kickstand. I remember years ago when I first looked into this area of investigation and how it took multiple months of research and comparing of photos to find the match to the make and model of this bicycle. The silver bike behind JonBenét was a 1996 or 97 Specialized Women's Crossroads bicycle. This bike was definitely for Patsy. It even has the mom catch-all bag or basket on the front. On to the third bike. This one is the mysterious one. Behind Patsy and JonBenét in the chair, only the handlebars and some of the front wheel can be seen. How do we know that this bike isn't just one of the other bikes we've already seen? It's the handlebars. Each bike had a different type of handlebar. JonBenét's bike had a mostly black flat type bar. Patsy's bicycle on the left was a silver riser type bar with a black knob in the middle of it, plus the mom catch-all basket attached to the front. The third mystery bike has a distinctive flat type silver handlebar with black grips. This confirms there were at least 3 bikes under the tree on Christmas morning. We know JonBenét and Patsy definitely got a bike, but for whom was the mystery third bike hidden back behind the chair for? It's time to dig into the interviews and statements the Ramseys have made throughout the last 27 years about the bikes. Who got one? Who didn't? And who was the one person left out? We will focus on John Ramsey's 1998 interview along with the statements he's made in documentaries and in the books he and Patsy have written over the years. Before we dive into the interviews, it's important to say, from the beginning of this case, whenever the Christmas presents or bikes are brought up in formal interviews or for the media, the Ramseys have always maintained that JonBenét received a bike that year and she got to ride it for a moment before going to the white Christmas party. In every single one of these historical statements and interviews, they never ever mention or say Burke got a bike that year too. Never, not once. Go back and check. And remember this as we go forward. Now on to the Ramseys' 1998 interview. I've highlighted the portions of the interview whenever the bikes are brought up. For clarity, I've broken them down into 4 exhibits. First, in Exhibit A, Lou Smith asks, "Did you go to the Barnhills to pick up a bike?" Ramsey says yes on Christmas Eve. We had given JonBenét a bike, we had given Patsy a bike, we were giving Burke a bike, but not that year. Anyway, there was a bike that we put in their basement, and I had gone over after the kids went to bed to get it, to put it under the tree. So far, JonBenét got a bike, Patsy got a bike, and they were giving Burke a bike, but not that year. Well, whatever that means. Then Smith asked John a great question. He asks, I've looked at a lot of pictures in regards to this particular case, and I can't remember seeing any bikes. What happened to the bikes? Exactly, Lou. Where were all of the bikes? Why are there no bikes seen in the crime scene photos? John guesses that they were in the garage. He says JonBenét rode her bike for a bit, and Patsy's bike he doesn't know, maybe the garage. Then Lou Smith says, "Have you seen it since, Patsy's bike?" John says, "Yeah, we have it." Lou Smith, Inaudible took it? Ramsey says, "No, we gave JonBenét's bike away. Patsy's bike we haven't Inaudible." Again, whatever that means. Moving on to Exhibit B. Smith now asked the Ramseys how they would get the presents staged around the tree. For Christmas, John responds that they would get up all the presents and put them under the tree, and we put those out and we got the bike. Mental note, John uses the singular bike when he recalls bringing the presents to the tree. Then he says, "The only thing I remember is going over to Joe's and getting the bike out of his garage, and then after Patsy went upstairs, I had her bike in our garage, and I got that out and put it by the tree, and then I went upstairs." Lou Smith, so both bikes then were at the tree. You just took the one from Joe Barnhill and put it by the tree? John Ramsey, and brought Patsy's in from the garage. So now, there are only 2 bikes. On to the next exhibit. Lou Smith, do you remember kind of what the kids got, what she got? John Ramsey, well, JonBenét got a bike. I think Burke got a bike too. It seems like we had 3 bikes there. JonBenét, I think she got a little doll that was one of those look-alike dolls that was supposed to look like her. I remember her looking at it and saying, "This doesn't look like me." So now, John says that JonBenét got a bike and he thinks Burke got one too. It seems like we had 3 bikes there. Now for the last exhibit. Lou and John are discussing the bicycle tracks in the snow, and John says that they might have come from Burke riding his bike. Lou Smith, did you say he had a bicycle that Christmas? John says, I got a bicycle, I think that's what it was. I gave myself a bicycle. Lou Smith, that Christmas? And then John says, yeah, Patsy got a bicycle, I got a bicycle, JonBenét got a bicycle. Burke already had one, I'm pretty sure. I don't know what it is, I guess. So now it's Patsy and JonBenét got bicycles, and oh yeah, by the way, I got a bicycle. I gave myself a bicycle. Really? Why, when asked if Burke got a bicycle that Christmas, does John deflect and ultimately not answer the question? Instead, he lets everyone know for the first time that he got a bicycle. He gave himself a bicycle that year. Remind you, these are all from the same interview. So, did John ultimately clear up anything for us, or did he just muddle the muck up even more? Why is such an easy question, who got a bike for Christmas that year, require the verbal gymnastics we just saw? Really, it's a 1, 2, 3 ABC question. One might say, after all these years, John may have simply forgotten who and who didn't get a bike that year. But the majority of these statements, interviews, and recollections were within the first few months or years of the case. And the narrative that JonBenét was the only kid to receive a bike that Christmas has stayed consistent throughout the years. Let's take a quick look at what the Ramseys wrote in their books. First, in The Death of Innocence, published in the year 2000, the Ramseys recount how they got a new bicycle for JonBenét, but all Burke really wanted this year was a Nintendo 64 video game system. Then adds this, several other unwrapped gifts from Santa were arranged next to the bicycle and the Nintendo, so each child would know whose pile was whose. This statement right here establishes the main gift for each child as a bike for JonBenét and a Nintendo 64 for Burke. If Burke did get a bicycle that year, then why not state that when identifying the piles of presents? 12 years later, in 2012, in John Ramsey's new book, he keeps it the same and says they bought a new bike for JonBenét and a Nintendo 64 for Burke. And like I said in the beginning, if you watch any of the documentaries or read through the books written on this case, you will find that this is the consistent narrative. That JonBenét got a bike and Burke didn't. His big gift that year was the Nintendo 64. So I guess that's that then. But only it isn't. In 2016, Burke gave his first public interview a few months before the 20th anniversary of his sister's death. During this interview, Burke let us know,
I think she got a big dollhouse. We both got bikes.
and with that, 20 years later, the narrative changed. Now, I guess one could say 20 years later is a long time for a kid to remember what presents he received for Christmas that year, and I would tend to agree. However, in the same interview, he remembered the other gifts he received that year: the Nintendo 64, an electric train, and yeah, a bike. But something else came out in 2016 that caught my attention. Paula Woodward released her book, We Have Your Daughter. Inside her book were portions of John Ramsey's journal he purportedly kept in the year after the murder. One of those entries read this: I made them stay in our room until I went downstairs and turned on the Christmas lights. I brought in Patsy's bicycle from the garage. Burke's and JonBenét's new bikes were already in front of the tree. Wow. Now remember, this journal entry was supposedly made within a year of the crime. And all of a sudden, John says JonBenét and Burke's bikes were already by the tree. Really, this is a red flag. We have painstakingly gone through all of the statements, books, and other narratives about the bikes in this episode. John and Patsy make it abundantly clear throughout that JonBenét got a bike that year and Burke's big gift was the Nintendo 64. Until Ramsey changed the story. Ramsey has done this before. He has altered pieces of the narrative throughout the years to fit the known evidence at the time and to influence the public opinion in this case. I believe this may be one of those times. The Ramseys knew the CBS documentary on this case was going to spill a lot of uncomfortable facts about Burke and a cover-up. It may have been perceived how it would look if JonBenét got a brand new bike that year and Burke didn't on the day of her death. Did jealousy over who got what and who didn't trigger the events that would later occur that night? And is that why the home video may be missing? There was one more thing that I uncovered in my investigation that I found interesting. It was a news clip from 2016. In this photo from the clip, a journalist is seen approaching Burke's home at the time in Charlevoix. It was in this clip that I spotted a bike, two bikes, staged out in front of the home. Digging deeper, I started to notice how similar this bike looked to the one behind JonBenét in this photo. So I started to compare parts of the bicycle to see maybe if it's the same one. And here are some of those photos. After comparing the pieces and parts of both bikes, I was able to determine that the bikes were a match. What clinched it for me was the black bicycle bag still attached to the front of the specialized bike after all these years. If you look closely, you can see a little white marking or symbol on the corner of both bags in the photo. That's because it's the same bag. And I believe the little white symbol matches the logo of the Ross Wheel Bike Company, maker of bike bags and other accessories. I remember thinking to myself at the time, why would Burke still have Patsy's bike 20 years later? And it's not like it was hung up and buried in his garage somewhere. It was out front of his house on full display. So, where does that leave us? It seems we may be further away from the truth now than from when we started. If the bicycle enigma wasn't the darkest shade of mud before, it probably is now. However, I believe the mystery can be boiled down to one of these two things. It's either Burke really didn't get a bike that year, he never did, and what the Ramseys said for the first 20 years is the truth. Or, Burke did in fact get a bike that year, and on Christmas Day there was an incident involving the bikes at the Ramsey home, or perhaps one of the bikes got damaged in a fit of pique, brought on by anger and jealousy. If so, it would explain the lack of photos and no home movies for the Ramseys on Christmas Day. And it would also explain why the Ramseys chose from the very beginning to omit from the narrative that Burke got a bike that year. And finally, in Burke's 1998 interview, he was asked exactly what he remembered of Christmas Day in 1996. Burke replied that he mostly remembered his little sister getting a bike for Christmas and how she kept falling off of it